Okay, Barry, so you were talking a little bit about the importance of user experience.
Yes.
Now, we're seeing this as an increasingly important part of the industry. Certainly from my experience, most project teams now, require user experience expertise. In the work we're doing in government, there is a dedicated resource per team. So this is an opportunity to maybe delve into the importance of user experience a little bit more, and I guess more of an interactive session. Everybody knows Barry Adams. We've got Gareth Dunlop from Fathom, and Rick Munro, also from Fathom. So can we just go around the panel, short introduction to yourselves, what your background is, and then we'll kick into some of the detail.
Sure. My name is Rick Munro. I've been working in the design industry in its widest definition for about 20 years. I started off as a graphic designer. I made moves in the late 90s into web design, then into multimedia, ultimately into what we now call user experience. And I'm sure we'll get into the definition of that later. And I work with Gareth in a dedicated UX agency called Fathom. We worked previously together in a company called Kainos. It was one of the biggest web design and development agencies in Ireland. And it's an exciting time for UX, certainly.
Okay, so hi folks, my name's Gareth Dunlop. I own and run the user experience agency called Fathom. My own background has crossover and similarities with Rick, albeit I came from a software development, computer science background. And over the years, as I became interested in web and I became interested in interface and I became interested in how users interact with technology, so I became increasingly aware of the fact that the amount of time and effort that we put into thinking like a user, understanding a user, avoiding assumptions, the harder we work to understand these intelligent strangers, these people that we don't know, who are at the far end of the technology, the mobile device, the computer that we are communicating with, the harder we work to know what matters to them, how they think, what they call things, what they want to do. The more we know about that stuff, the happier that they can be, the more we can please them, the better we can improve our brand and our service. So a couple of years ago, I observed that this was a real growing area, particularly in the real internet hotspots. You look at the UK digital marketing space in London, you look west to the States, and you see this getting increasingly valuable. And as so often happens, increasingly we're understanding user experience to be a fundamental part of how organizations differentiate themselves, and a fundamental part of software design, web design, communication strategy, and so on. So I came a circuitous route via software development, but became increasingly interested in actually making software effective as a big driver for how you design it. So that's my background.
Barry?
Yeah,
Anything more to say?
I came at UX from an entirely different angle, which is probably one of the beauties of UX, that there's no two UX designers who have the same background. I came at this from a digital marketing angle when the focus was still firmly on digital rather than on marketing. And it was about making websites more effective and add more value to users. Because, at some stage you get a lot of traffic on your website, you're going to have to look at what the traffic is actually doing on your website. So for me, there was a real lovely process of discovery for probably the last 10 years, I would say, where it was really about analyzing how users arrive on your website and what they do next, and where things go wrong and where things go right, and really diving deep into that, and then combining that with user testing and different layouts and the different methods of keeping users longer on websites to do the things you want them to actually do. And that really ignited my passion for UX design over the years.
Okay, now UX, 2 letters, in theory should be very simple. In practice, it's a really confusing area. Could you just give us some insights into what user experience means to each of you? So Rick?
Yeah, it's maybe not the best start to the panel. I actually loathe the term UX. I've just come to really see it as something which represents the kind of distortion of it. In a way, I mean, what we're talking about is user experience as if it's a thing that we do, but it's actually something that we all have as users of any product or any website. So when we talk about UX work, it isn't this edgy kind of new thing, and it should be UE actually, because it's user experience, but X presumably makes it a bit more interesting. But it is seen as a new pursuit, but various elements of it have been going on for years. And if you look at things like research, analysis, and kind of design for the user, that's been going on for many years before the web came about. It's an umbrella term for a number of disciplines which all combine now, because everything we're experiencing a lot of new devices, a lot of new interfaces, and we hear about the Internet of Things, and we're going to be interacting with many more things over the coming years. So all of the disciplines that make up what we term UX are going to become increasingly important in the coming years. But really, it's a number of different activities that we bring together and focus on the end users of products. And obviously, it goes without saying, I think it was said earlier, if there's no UX design, there is still a user experience. So it's likely to be a bad one if there's no design for the user involved. So it's there anyway. What we do is try and improve it through various tools and techniques, which involve focusing very clearly on whoever's going to be using the product or service.
Gareth?
For me, user experience is a reflection of the fact that increasingly we understand the world, we understand the products, the services, the companies, the brands that we use, buy, engage with. We understand them based on the experience that they give us. We no longer buy based purely on unemotional, right-brain, mathematical, analytical thinking about how good a product or a service is. If we want to have food, we expect a very different experience in McDonald's that we get if we go for a romantic meal for two for an anniversary, that we get at a sandwich bar, that we get at a burger bar. And so the experience that we expect in McDonald's is almost the very opposite of the experience that we expect if we go out for a romantic meal for two. In one instance, we're eating food, but we want in and out quickly. In another instance, we're eating food, but actually we would like to linger and spend 2 or 3 hours there. So there's this understanding that how we communicate what our product offering is, what our service is defined not just by itself, but is defined by what is an increasingly important term in the world of user experience, which is the context of use. Why is the user there? What are they wanting to do? When we look at websites and we look at web applications, very often the reason that a user is there is actually not because they want to be there, but for the very opposite reason. They want to get on with something else in their lives. So by understanding that and thinking about that, we can ask questions like, does the user want to spend more time on the site? Do they want to spend less time on the site? Is there one big task they're here to fulfill? Are there loads of smaller tasks that they're here to fulfill? Is there types of content that they're looking for? Is there a type of order in which they expect to engage with and find that content? And so what user experience allows us to do is it allows us to invest project time in activities that traditionally have just enjoyed no project time whatsoever. So things like what we call our menu systems, how many links there are in our menu systems, what we call our buttons, where they are on the page, what our text is, what's our opening sentence, how do we describe our value proposition, and so on and so on. So all these project elements that traditionally have got skimmed over in pursuit of the visual aesthetic are now back in the spotlight, because eventually we've all caught up with the realization that they are increasingly more important drivers of website success than all the things that we have traditionally or historically been focusing on. So user experience opens up this idea that we are marketing to human beings like you and I at the far end of a computer, and the harder we think about the things that matter to them, the better we can make the experience.
Okay. I'll come back to you in a second, Barry, but you got me thinking there, Gareth. I mean, it seems to me that experience as a word today is associated more with the luxury side of things. So, I mean, you gave the McDonald's versus high-class restaurant. You know, the high-class restaurant is an experience, and McDonald's kind of isn't. So, have we actually created a rod for our own backs by calling this field user experience? Have we set the expectation on the management side that it's actually a luxury, that it actually isn't essential?
It's a good question. The maybe slightly flippant answer is that there remain so many underperforming websites around that it's the only term we have that allows us to group the activities together to fix them. But I suppose where I might differ with the question, and I'm sure I probably shouldn't, is I think we do have an experience at McDonald's. We don't consciously say I'm having an experience. We might be too hungover. We might be just wanting a bit of lunch. You know, there are different reasons why you go there. But we do have an expectation of what happens when we go through the doors. I mean, you know, to go back to how we understand experience, we did some work last year with 3 local classified websites. Can't tell you which sector they were in, or it'll give the game away. But we did user testing across the 3. There were only 3 competing in the local geography. And the one which came top across every user testing criteria was by some distance the most ugly of the 3. And so the warning for me is that I think it's better to be beautiful and functional than ugly and functional. But the message for me is that the experience that the user expects is functional first. And actually, if we don't deliver that first requirement, they're not even thinking about the aesthetic. And maybe there's an analogy with the McDonald's thing there first. If it's not quick and easy, well, then actually we're not even thinking about anything else. So.
Sure. No, thank you.
If I can add to that, your experience at McDonald's is actually very intimately designed. McDonald's has a very strict way how they want you to use their service, they want you to buy their food. They want you to go in, place an order, get it quick, sit down, 15, 20 minutes, and then get out the door. That's why the seats in McDonald's are slightly uncomfortable, the lighting is a little bit too bright, the thing is a little bit too noisy. They don't want you sitting there for 10 hours with a laptop in front of you, ordering 1 coffee every 4 hours. They have put a lot of effort into designing the experience of going to McDonald's. So I wouldn't underestimate that.
Sure, no, I understand that, and I wasn't trying to get into a semantic discussion. It was more when you go with your budget and your plan, and you're saying, I want to do user experience, is the response, screw that, just make it work?
Yeah, it's rare, I think, to follow up on what I think has been echoed there. You don't really use those terms. I mean, ultimately, you'll have a goal that you're trying to get to, where you're trying to improve on something, improve on an existing benchmark, or improve on the usability of something. It's probably a bad idea to go in and say we're going to work on user experience, because, as you say, it does make it sound like it's some kind of pixie dust that you're going to pull out of your pocket. Actually, all of the improvements that you're going to bring will come from fairly tried and trusted methods like research and analysis, as I said earlier.
Okay. So from your experience, can you give us some examples of the types of design decisions that UX supports or informs, and how that has actually delivered real benefit to the service, to the user, or to the business that you're delivering the service for? Barry?
Well, from my background as a digital marketer, we tend to focus a lot on e-commerce websites. And the focus there is always, more sales, get more out of your traffic. And that means removing obstacles, like I said in my talk. It's about reducing the cognitive load on people when they go through your process. I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. 2 years ago, I made a decision about Christmas to not shop at Amazon anymore because I was angry at the tax dodgers, and to buy off Waterstones and HMV. And I very quickly regretted that decision because their e-commerce experience was just excruciating. Endless fields of forms to fill in. Stuff didn't make sense. The shopping cart wasn't intuitive. Did I have it in it or not? Payment method was just painful. And that, for me, made it very clear that Amazon, being the big retailer that they are, have focused a lot on removing all of those obstacles. This is why they have, for example, the buy with one click. This is why they remember your details and you make it very easy for you to see what's in your cart and what you pay for shipping. And it's things, like I said, you don't notice. And when it comes to optimizing e-commerce experiences, it's the crucial error that companies make is projecting their own internal information requirements onto the website. We need to get names and email addresses, and we need to get date of birth, and we need to know what the interests are, et cetera, et cetera. No, you really don't. You don't need to know any of that. You need to stick to the absolute bare minimum of information that you require from your customers to make the transaction happen, and only ask that of them. It's quite a daunting decision for companies who are used to grabbing all this data from every source that they can. But only if you do that, if you make it as minimalist as possible and as straightforward as possible, will you see significant uplifts in your e-commerce.
Gareth?
I'll give you 2 examples from a couple of projects that are going through the studio at the moment. One project we're doing at the minute for Telefonica in Dublin is to do with one of their mobile phone brands, and they asked us to improve the conversion rate on their site. As a slight aside, if I may just comment briefly on internet marketing versus traditional marketing. Very often traditional marketing is measured in terms of volume. I think when we move from traditional presentational marketing and we move into online interactive marketing, I think the KPI by which we have to judge all of our activities is conversion. Did the person who came to our site, were they able to do the thing they want to do? When we're talking about site success, when we're talking about how we express our brand online, for me, we've no other choice than to start with, did people convert? Were they able to do what they wanted to do? So in that context, the two examples that I would share would be, firstly, Telefonica. We built a site that allowed we built the customer experience, we planned the journey, the online customer journey, that would take them from the homepage to becoming full members of this Telefonica brand called 48, which is a big brand in the Republic of Ireland. There was a number of times during our user testing that we noticed that the users were feeling either lost or a little bit insecure about where they were. And so we ran 2 split tests, 2 A/B tests. We wanted to know which of the following 2 terms gives the user most confidence: login or sign in. We wanted to know which of these 2 terms gives the user the confidence to go ahead and complete their conversion when their SIM arrives in the post. So they go onto the site, they order their new SIM card for their phone, it arrives, they then have to complete becoming a customer. Which of the following 2 converts to a greater extent? The call to action, register SIM, or the call to action, activate SIM? I can't give you the numbers, but I can tell you that sign-in outperformed login significantly, activate SIM outperformed register SIM significantly. We were able to make 2 really good design decisions about what we called links and buttons that 10 years ago probably would never have been spoken about, but which drove up conversion, getting a greater number of people to the next step, and subsequently getting a greater number of people to convert and become customers of Telefonica. I think the second example of user experience in action is a project which Rick is leading for a mobile application developer who we're doing some work with at the moment, who wants to make the buying and selling and trading of stocks and shares more simple and more straightforward. They were thinking about the idea that they would introduce an element of gamification into the app so that there was a light-hearted element to the fact that the person who had the app was getting not only stocks and shares knowledge, but were also becoming part of a more light-hearted game environment to encourage them to come back again and again. By simply going online, Googling, finding white papers, seeing what research had been done previously, we were able to find 2 pieces of research that said when you're putting the user in a situation where they are mastering a subject matter, that is an end in itself. You need to focus on the fact that the user is enjoying mastery. You don't have to worry about these more gimmicky gamification elements. So again, we're able to make a really confident design decision that takes us away from the world of speculation, that leans on research that's there, that gives us confidence that when we're designing for adoption, our client will get a better outcome. So a couple of dead simple examples of project activities that maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have seen the light of day, but which contribute to the ultimate KPI, which is conversion.
Maybe just, if I could follow up the point that Barry made there. I mean, you asked what kind of decisions does UX work support? And Barry, you offered the example there of forms and how a lot of organizations like to kind of harvest as much information as they can at the point of input by the user. And if we take user-centered design as kind of the foundation of UX work, because that's ultimately what we're engaged in, it's user-centered design. Once you take a very pragmatic approach to a lot of traditional processes like forms and like kind of inputs, you can end up rattling the cage of various departments across an organization. So UX work can be challenging, not just in terms of delivery, but in terms of the organization that you're engaging with. And it makes a lot of people question, well, what am I doing? What, are you telling me I've been doing something wrong here? But it really means taking a very, very unrelenting look at an organization through the customer's eyes, through the user's eyes, and then bringing elements into play only as they're required. So in terms of the kinds of decisions that the supports, UX work supports, a lot of the time they can be unpopular decisions.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like you all believe that UX is an important part of the process, but is there always a specific measurable commercial return to UX work? You know, can you say it saved us X, it earned us Y, or is it an implicit part of actually delivering a product that does what it's supposed to do?
I mean, ultimately, it makes it easier if there's a very clear metric that you can apply to a process, which you can then use as a benchmark to improve on. When it comes to maybe a lot of B2B activity, there can be very grey areas in terms of what represents a conversion or what represents a completion. So Again, one of the big requirements of user experience work is to understand the business that your client's engaged in. So again, this means getting away from the approach of, here's my design, now what's the question? It really is about asking the right questions, understand the client's business, understand what their business objectives are for their app, for their website, or for their service, and then building everything around that. Again, I think one of the misperceptions of UX is that it's essentially saying, oh, well, the user's always right or the customer's always right. The organization is a massive stakeholder in any design process, and you have to understand what the business objectives are for that organization, and then start to tie everything into that as well. So that's one of the absolute foundations.
I would love to give the answer yes, Tom, but the answer is no. The answer is no. In the vast majority of cases, you can outline a commercial return for UX. In the vast majority of cases, you look at the work that we're doing in Telefonica. We know what their conversion ratio was before we got involved. We know what we are aspiring to when the new site goes live. We look at some e-commerce work we did last year for some of the more major local e-commerce websites. We've seen conversion go up. But there are times, it is the minority, but there are times when user experience is just the right thing to do. You have to do it for no other motivation than it's just the right way to treat your customers. As Rick has said, many things on the web are measurable, but some things just aren't. Some things, without just spending time with every single user, you just can't know. And sometimes, just because it's the right thing to do, you've got to say, well, how could I best please my customer? It's not uncommon that organizations find themselves in monopolistic situations where the customer has no choice. It's not uncommon that, particularly through the delivery of public services, that again, local citizens or regional or national citizens have no choice but to buy the dog license that way, or to register the death or the birth a certain way, or to MOT their car a certain way. They will convert whether you please them or not. But it's better to please them and to serve them than to not please them and to not serve them. So in the vast majority of cases, there is a commercial return. I think the final thing that's maybe worth mentioning is that sometimes people get there the long way or the circuitous way. And I suppose the proof that I would use for that is if Ryanair finally start to think about user experience, then there's no hope for any of us. We all have to embrace it at some stage. Because for years, Ryanair, when they looked at their 4 Ps of their marketing, they said, you know what, our product and our price is so good, we don't even need to think about place. Our users will work as hard as they want to buy our tickets. But now that those other elements are getting squeezed, Ryanair, like many other organisations, have nowhere to go but to look at the place in the context of the 4 Ps of marketing and say, how can we make our products easier to buy? How can we please our customers? So it's most commonly very measurable, 90% of cases. Sometimes it's not, but either way, it remains the right thing to do.
All right.
When you look at the returns of UX in the context of, for example, internal software for companies or governments, it's very hard to quantify that. I will admit that. And like Gareth said, if you don't do UX, that's fine, but you're basically making a conscious decision to not care about the people who use it. That's a very risky path to go on. When it comes to a piece of internal software that a business uses, you probably, with a little bit of effort, can make it measurable to some extent, and how easier it is to use a piece of software to do a task versus, a piece of software that hasn't been optimized for UX. The time saved on that, the frustration, the morale of the employee, those are things you can indirectly measure. The adoption rate within the company, how quick people are to adopt it. It is hard. You have to take a few educated guesses here and there, but I think in nearly all cases, commercial return, not always, but there will be some benefit in some less tangible aspects of your business that you should probably research.
Okay. Whenever I was thinking about this panel, I did a little bit of looking around at some of the websites that I would consider to be well designed, well engineered. And to be honest, you look at sites like Google, Amazon, even gov.uk, yes, they're effective, but they're a bit homely as well. Is there something that I guess is preventing really good UX from being really aesthetically pleasing?
I don't think it has to be. I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the value of something that looks really, really good. Yes, of course, like Gareth said, function should be the baseline. It should always do what it's supposed to do in as easy and as straightforward a way as possible. But there's also a growing bulk of research that now shows that the visual impact of a website has a lot of impact on how users perceive the information presented by the website. I think it was actually Microsoft who did this research back in 2008, 2009, that showed that if you have a website that looks unprofessional maybe, or just a little bit bare and amateurish, people don't necessarily trust what the website is saying. They don't trust the content that is being presented on. Whereas if a website looks professional and slick and has a good aesthetic appeal to it, it gives people more confidence that this is a trustworthy partner or a trustworthy website with trustworthy information on it. So no, UX doesn't have to be ugly. I think that's a very common mistake. UX can be really, really beautiful and really well designed, but that does take extra effort on top of making it user-friendly, of making it easy for people to use it. But in a lot of cases, it would be worthwhile going that extra mile.
Gareth?
It's a great question, Tom, because for me it gets to the absolute heart of the issue. And I think there's a few things jumping around my head. If I may expand on a point that Barry made around his use of Amazon. Let's consider the user experience on Amazon beyond simply the interface. Let's consider, for instance, the huge breadth of inventory that's there. Let's consider the unbelievable levels of intuition that are available in the search box. It's autocomplete, it's predictive text, how it shows you your results. Let's consider how it allows you to splice and filter and facet your search results any way that you want. Let's consider that in most cases you can get the product you're looking for 1 or 2 days into the future, and in the vast majority of cases it arrives before you're expecting it. Let's consider that we have the confidence to know that anybody who is an Amazon seller has been through Amazon's pretty rigorous, terms and conditions and quality assurance pack, so it comes with that as well. Let's consider then that we know that people who are on Amazon are motivated to get 5-star reviews from people who buy from Amazon. And so you think of all the buying psychology behind Amazon. There are 20 things which are far more important to the person on that site than the answer to the question, does this site look pretty? Is it giving me what I want? So you consider that from a competitive perspective. Let's say we wanted to build an e-commerce shop and compete with Amazon. Where do we start? We certainly don't start at the front end. We certainly don't start at the interface. We start with the much more difficult questions about all the other things that we know from Amazon matter to the user more than just the visual aesthetic or the front end. I think that the other thing to mention is just, I think we frequently underestimate the user's demand for speed. We're in a world now where if you have a mobile website and it takes longer than a second to load on a mobile device, Google is instantly starting to penalize you. Google ran an experiment 3 or 4 years ago where they stalled their search results by half a second, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 seconds. By the time they had stalled their search results by 2.5 seconds, 40% of people had pressed the back button never to return. So we're marketing in this world where the user's demand for speed is incalculable. They're impatient, they're trigger happy on the back button, and beautiful things take longer to download than less beautiful things. And whilst I would agree with Barry's idea that beautiful is better than ugly, I do have a notion that if beautiful was more effective than ugly, that Amazon would have implemented something that was beautiful, and they haven't. And so I can only surmise that they've tested everything else to death. I can only surmise that their design is very considered and thought through. So for me, the challenge of Amazon is, I think they've redefined how we need to understand design.
I'll answer from my perspective as a graphic designer in a former life. And I remember web design when it was a case of firing up Photoshop with a blank canvas and then just starting to colour in. And I don't mean that as a dismissive remark for graphic design, because good graphic design still has potency and has real power. But that's how a lot of people design websites, and I think if anybody else is involved in web design in the room, you'll remember what that time that I'm referring to. But the two aren't mutually exclusive. I think also, again, to address another misperception about UX is that you don a lab coat and suddenly you start designing based on data and based on graphs and charts. actually what you design with are very human qualities like empathy for the user, and that can lead to some really beautiful visual solutions. But I would challenge anybody who puts undue emphasis on the aesthetics of a website to watch a user test of that website in action. If they design a website which they feel is a design classic or an exemplar, watch a user test of it, because over the years I've seen too many examples to count of users who start a user test by saying, yes, I like the look of the site, yes, I think this site's going to give me what I want, yes, I trust it, etc., etc. Within a minute or less, they've forgotten about that, they can't find what they want, or the site doesn't work in quite the same way they would have wanted, and at that point it doesn't matter how much visual design you throw at that service or product. You've lost the user. That initial trust that you've gained has gone, and no matter how much you would try and overcompensate for that, you're not going to bring them back. So there's a balance, as ever with these things, and certainly we would see that visual design element is very important, but it sits at the top of a hierarchy of needs, if you like, which have to be answered and ticked off the list before you can get to what we might term beautiful visual design. But beautiful is subjective. And what I most like about a user-centered approach is that you remove that subjectivity and you design a product or a service based on objective things. And one person's beautiful website is another person's mess. We all have opinions on design, but once you start designing through the eyes of a user of a product or service, you remove that subjectivity.
This is getting interesting for me because, Gareth, you've mentioned psychology. I think we've mentioned data and science and engineering and empirical studies. You mentioned the user focus, which is kind of the anti-art almost. And then you mentioned colouring in, Rick. So, if we wanted to, hire somebody into our organisation that would be a user experience practitioner, what skills do they need to have? Where do you go to recruit these people?
I often give a kind of lightning tour of the history of UX and look at some of the significant people involved in it. And I look at people like Don Norman, who was a former mathematician. I look at Alan Cooper, who introduced the idea of the use of personas in software development. He was a software developer. I look at Susan Weinschenk, who was a behavioral psychologist. And then I look at Jesse James Garrett, who is another significant figure, particularly when it comes to the web. And they all come from different backgrounds. So as you said earlier, it's a very broad church. There's a lot of different backgrounds come into it. So there's no magic formula to that. It all comes down to a user experience practitioner isn't going to deliver the user experience. It's very much a team exercise, and it relies on the contributions of an entire design and development team and more to bring an offering to the table, but it has to be coordinated and everyone has to be bought into what is trying to be achieved. So I think, Gareth, you mentioned Ryanair. I think they announced today they're hiring 200 people or something like that to work on their digital platform out of Dublin. So they can start to see the importance of this, but it won't be a case of one person in the middle of that crowd who has a highfalutin job title like UX unicorn or whatever and deliver it. It will be as the combined effort of that team who all get it and who all understand that they're all pulling in the same direction, and it's going to be the customer who ultimately decides whether their work is good or not.
I accept all that, but if you're a small issue organisation, user experience should be equally important to you. So how do you start to bring that thinking into the organisation, or is it just latently there and it just needs to be nurtured and unleashed?
It's another one of those challenges. Again, when you start talking about user experience, it's almost as if it is this new thing that nothing else anybody else has done has been important. Actually, it's a slight change of emphasis. It's a slight change of approach. So I would almost be tempted to say that user experience isn't a discipline. It is that approach. And actually, if you used resources in a different way, which may require a champion in the organisation to do that, but the resources that are there can be brought to bear to deliver better user experiences.
Okay. Any other comments on that point?
I think maybe the only thing I'd share, Tom, is to corroborate what Rick has said and to say that whilst it's an easy answer to give, when I don't have the hard work to do in terms of implementation, the mindset of user experience, the mindset of saying that how we treat our customers online, how we treat these people that we will probably never see, they're distant from us, can be a competitive advantage. And so we need to start with the question, not what do I want to say, but we need to start with the question, what does the user want to do? That culture needs to start at the top. It needs to be believed in by management, because often it impacts how businesses are run. I'll give you a very quick example, if I may. We're doing some work at the minute with one of the large energy providers locally. And in one of the early workshops, we were able to bring together the heads of marketing, customer care, management, and energy services. So we started to flesh out the types of content that they share, the types of customer segments that they are responsible for, just to get a flavour for all the components that we were dealing with. And because the folks at customer care were used to being on the phone and being on email all day, they were really well versed about what mattered to customers. They had really good stats about what the phone calls were about, what customers expected. And so we quickly ascertained that the big queries were around querying the bill, around moving house, around. We very quickly got a good sense. So we moved around the table and we got to the people at Energy Services. And they were responsible for two things. They were responsible for selling energy products, such as like solar panels, sort of new recyclable type energy products. And they were also responsible for how-to guides, how to insulate your house better, how to insulate your loft, how to get the most from your energy. And so they would be producing videos, how-to videos, guides, all that sort of stuff. And there was this lovely moment in the meeting where these two departments from the organisation that have merrily gone on their separate ways for years and years and years realised that from the user's perspective, the user had no interest in the difference between I need help with my bill and I need help insulating my loft. They saw this all as a help, support and advice content bracket. And so these two parts of the organisation, which had been previously in a silo and very happy to be so, now realised that they were going to have to publish their content in a different way. So it needs to start at the top. It involves business process change, and it probably involves everybody.
Okay. Has anybody got questions in the audience? Johnny?
I'm not going to heckle Barry. Johnny Wallace, University of Ulster. Barry and I are probably on the same page in terms of UX design. We think, Steve Krug, it's not rocket science, so rocket science makes it easy and don't make me think are too good sort of Bibles to do in terms of interface design. But you mentioned Rick, Don Norman, and Norman and Jakob Nielsen have been sort of the godfathers of interface design for a long time. But last year that caused a huge row because they were basically saying that they recommended you should have a totally separate mobile site. But as we move now more to smartphones and tablets being the main interaction for people, do you think that's still viable?
I'll come back to that magic word context that Gareth mentioned earlier. It'll depend on what you want that mobile experience to be. I won't question Jakob Nielsen's expertise, but certainly he knows how to, shall we say, start a debate that brings attention to the Nielsen Norman Group. I would. If there is the data and the evidence to suggest that you need to do very different things on a mobile platform, then unpopular though it might seem with the current trend or the popular viewpoint, then that's what you must do. Ultimately, if you're going to follow a user-centered approach and you do all the good stuff like user testing and all the appropriate research beforehand, you'll very quickly find out if you're wrong or not. But if you're following an approach that builds in testing and validation as you go along, you'll find that out hopefully sooner rather than later. So it's viable if that's what the context demands.
If I can throw a counter argument at it, that I think that is a very good example of an over-focus on UX, where UX is the most important thing. That yes, UX can be better in a separate mobile site or even a separate mobile app. But in the context of websites, for example, it's not just about the UX. It's also about getting people to the website in the first place. And if you have a separate mobile website or a separate mobile app, Google, for example, will not rank you as high as it would otherwise do in its mobile search results. It likes to see websites that are built responsibly, that just offer the same content and roughly equal user experiences to people on different platforms. But if you take that out of the equation, a separate mobile sites make perfect sense. But if you keep in mind that, right, we still have to get people to this website in the first place. That changes the dynamic straight away. So I would actually argue with that piece of research and say, right, you're probably being too narrow in your scope. You need to look beyond just the experience and also to getting people to partake in the experience in the first place.
Thank you. Anybody else? How much more time do you have, Conla? Okay. I think I've got nothing more either, so I think we're done. I think we're back on schedule, so thank you very much for helping us do that.
Happy to be able to.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.